This week on Jerusalem Dateline, as the Jewish high holidays approach, Israel could be facing another coronavirus lockdown. Plus, excitement is running high over the Israel-UAE peace agreement, but some Arab states are waiting for the outcome of U.S. elections. And God at work behind the scenes in Iran. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell. As the Jewish high holidays approach, Israel is heading towards another COVID-19 lockdown. Government ministers voted in favor of the lockdown that will prevent Israelis from venturing more than about a quarter of a mile from their homes. All businesses and places of recreation will be closed, and restaurants can only deliver. The closure is expected to cost Israel billions of dollars, and business owners have threatened anarchy if they're forced to shut down without receiving compensation. More than 146,000 Israelis have been infected with the virus. Most have recovered, but more than 1,000 people have died. Still, with a surge to a record 4,000 new cases in one day, the health system warned it could crash if the numbers continue to rise. Before the lockdown is put in place, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will head to Washington to sign a formal agreement normalizing relations with the United Arab Emirates, and according to reports, also with Bahrain. While excitement is running high over the achievement, it appears other Arab states are waiting for the outcome of U.S. presidential elections in November before making any moves. A unique open-air concert in the southern Israeli city of Beersheba began with a surprise.
We'll play you two national anthems, one the Israeli one and the other one of the United Emirates, with whom we are going to sign a peace treaty.
And things are already happening over there as an Israeli model traveled to Dubai for a fashion shoot with a Dubai-based model. And the CEO of Israel's biggest bank led a business delegation to the UAE.
I'm getting a very good vibe, a very good response for any community member that we have met, which is a big surprise.
All signs of the warm reception that much of Israel is giving the historic agreement. Prime Minister Netanyahu will sign the normalization of relations with the UAE on September 15th in Washington, culminating years of hard work.
We've brought peace our way, peace in exchange for peace, and this opens a new era between Israel and the Arab states. I expect that more countries will join the peace circle.
It strengthens Israel and the pragmatic, moderate Arab countries in front of the radical Muslim camp represented by Turkey and Iran. Those two countries and the radical Islam camp was counting on the fact that as long as they work against Israel, all Arab countries will be with them.
But that didn't happen, as Israeli Ambassador Svi Mazel noted that the Arab League refused to back a Palestinian resolution condemning the deal. Mazel once served as ambassador to Egypt, the first Arab country to sign a peace treaty with Israel more than 40 years ago.
We collaborate especially on intelligence level, security level, but there is no normalization.
Now Egypt can only watch as the Emirates benefit economically, technologically, and in other ways with Israel.
So Egypt now, as I understand, they don't say it openly, but they regret not having normalized really relations with us and have not benefited from the possibilities.
One benefit for President Trump is being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for mediating the deal, which has already borne other fruit. Saudi Arabia and Bahrain both opened their skies to Israeli flights. Serbia wants to move its embassy to Jerusalem, and Kosovo and Israel announced mutual recognition.
It is a success. Absolutely success.
Nevertheless, Mazel tells CBN News he thinks others in the Middle East are waiting to see how November's U.S. elections play out.
They would like to see that President Trump is elected and continues his policy. So they will be sure if they go on and normalize with Israel.
And then there's another major player.
Saudi Arabia is in the Arabian Peninsula, where the birth of Islam happened some 1400 years ago. They would like to have open relations with Israel, but they have to wait to see what happens.
Mazel says while he's surprised the UAE acted now, he sees it as an important step forward for everyone. As headlines praise the peace agreement between Israel and the UAE, some question whether the Gulf state can keep the peace. That's because it financially supports an educational curriculum of hate against Israel taught in Palestinian-controlled areas.
As world leaders and news outlets proclaim peace between Israel and the UAE, rockets and explosive balloons continue to pour into Israel from Gaza. What's the connection?
This deal can either be a great blessing or it can be a disaster. It's a blessing if the United Arab Emirates stops funding the incitement of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency. Right now, the UAE is the number 5 funder of UNRWA, and UNRWA has a curriculum based on war on the Jews.
David Badin heads the Center for Near East Policy Research. For years, his group has investigated what's taught to Palestinian children in UNRWA schools and shown it to the world in documentaries like this one. Most Palestinian children in Gaza attend schools teaching this hate.
So that the curriculum, which we have painstakingly gone through, all 364 school books, which mandates that children have to be trained for belligerence against Israel, to take up arms against Israel. Their slogan is the right of return by force of arms. This is the only way to stop it, is to go to the donor countries.
Gaza children went back to school in early August, while nearby young people were launching fire and explosive balloons at Israel.
البنات الحركة برضه مفيدة لنا، دمرت كثير لليهود. الاقتصاد عند الاحتلال يعني بالنيل. هذا البالونات الحارة.
The school year has begun on the wrong foot with Hamas, which controls UNRWA basically, firing all of Israel. Well, that can be restrained.
And Badin feels that begins with pressure on the UAE to take full advantage of the peace opportunity.
The U.S. and Israel are approaching this major donor nation to UNRWA, UAE. Now is the time to say, now this is a time of good feelings, this is a time of business, this is a time of euphoria. Let's use the euphoria in a direct way.
Currently, the school curriculum is written by the Palestinian Authority. Badin wants to see a different approach to education, written and taught by Palestinians who want peace. He believes had the U.S. and Israel insisted on that approach during the Oslo Accords back in the 90s, things would be different today. Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
In a high-tech preventative measure, Israeli police are testing a new weapon to defend Israel's southern border with Gaza against the terror threat of explosive balloons.
Just outside the Gaza Strip area where we're located, the border police are activating a new laser-guided system that is capable of shooting down balloons.
And that protection is greatly needed. For more than 2 years, terrorists have attacked Israel, destroying land by sending fire kites and balloons packed with explosives across the border. In the past month alone, it has led to 450 fires in southern Israel. Fortunately, the new laser system deployed by Israeli police is succeeding against this threat.
And until now, the latest new guided system has a success rate of more than 90% of shooting down the balloons. And we're doing that in order to prevent them from exploding inside community areas and causing injuries or possibly killing people.
The system is designed to work alongside aircraft. Ben-Gurion University professor Amiel Ishaya says the laser system could have an even greater use beyond Israel.
We don't see any other balloon threat in the world except for here, maybe in South Korea or North Korea or between that border. But the main business we see in it is anti-drone. And anti-drone is a big worldwide threat that is coming up.
Hamas, which controls the Gaza Strip, recently announced a ceasefire so Israel would restore critical fuel shipments to Gaza. If the past is any indication, Israelis realize ceasefires don't last very long. That's why the laser system is such a godsend. Coming up, a powerful new documentary that looks at Israel's Iron Dome anti-rocket defense system and the people it protects. When terrorists started firing rockets and mortars across the Gaza border into Israel 20 years ago, no one paid much attention until people started getting killed. That's when Israeli engineers came up with the Iron Dome anti-rocket defense system. But it wasn't easy. The Iron Dome is also a new documentary series about the defense system, the people who invented it, and those it protects. I spoke with the documentary's creator and producer, Nati Dinar, recently about the series. Nati Dinar, welcome to Jerusalem Dateline.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You've made a brilliant three-part documentary, Iron Dome. Tell us why you made that film and what it's about.
Well, actually, we made it, the film I made with my director, Uri Baron. We wanted to explore the story of the making of Iron Dome as a life-saving weapon system, and we found out that the story is much bigger than just an army system. It's a big story. It's a story of people under threat, of decision-making, and ingenuity, and the genius of Israeli engineers.
Tell us a little more about what the film is about.
It actually tells the historic story of when the rocket threat started in 2001, from rockets fired from Gaza to the nearest city of Sderot, which is probably 2 kilometers away. At the beginning, it was just all kinds of stupid rockets falling, nobody getting hurt. For the first time, when there were a death casualty, people understood this threat is not a game. And one person named Danny Gold, who was in the Ministry of Security in charge of research and development, said, okay, we have to tackle this threat. It's a new threat, and we have to try to find a solution. And he initiated the search of how can you protect from rockets falling from the sky.
And how long were you working on this film, and how many people did you interview? It seemed like there were a lot of people involved.
Well, yes, the idea started in 2015. I wanted to meet Danny Gold and understand the story. I thought it was a one-man story, and here's this guy, he has an idea, he starts moving things along, and just like making a film, it's never about the guy having the idea and pushing it forward. It's a lot of people that have to be involved, and we started researching and talking to people. I think in our research, we probably interviewed over 100 people from all aspects, and until we decided how we wanted to tell the story. And at a certain point, we understood that the story is not about how rockets hit each other in the sky or how you develop them. This is a human story about people living in threat 24/7 and people trying to protect them, whether they are decision makers or engineers. And we eventually said we want to make an historic piece, but told in a personal way. And in the series, I think there's about 40 characters who give their point of view, and we feel that when you give the multiple point of view of everybody involved, people can understand both the threat and the amazing story of how this Iron Dome system came to life.
What impacted you the most in making the film?
I think it was when we understood that this series, it is about a specific story about rockets and Iron Dome, but if you look through the 3 episodes, you will understand how Israel works, how things happen here in Israel, how things get done, how politics gets into the game, how personal ego gets into the game, how the money affects decision making, and how we have unbelievable people for this, and why Israel is a startup nation that can do the unbelievable in low budget and in very short time. And I think this is what we understand, this is what we wanted to convey, that you see how it works with Iron Dome, you can probably understand how Israel is dealing with coronavirus. It's probably not that different. People are telling us what to do now, and people behind in the closed doors and the back offices are thinking, how can we protect the citizens of Israel with our ingenuity?
Okay, so just tell us real quick, how can people see the film in the United States or wherever else they are?
Well, luckily, we managed to secure a license deal with Easy, IZZY, a new streaming platform that brings the content from Israel to the world. It's very easy to search. Just do IZZY on the web, sign up. It's $5 a month. You get hundreds of hours of content. Iron Dome is one of them, but there's a lot of great Israeli creators telling Israeli stories, and finally there's a platform that can showcase it to the world.
Okay, Nati Dinar, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Up next, a new book about how God is at work behind the scenes in Iran. Iran and good news aren't usually found in the same sentence, but author and evangelist Hormoz Shariat from Iran Alive Ministries says there's a lot going on that's not in the news. I spoke with Dr. Shariat earlier about his new book, Iran's Great Awakening, How God is Using a Muslim Convert to Spark Revival. Dr. Hormoz Shariat, welcome to Jerusalem Dateline.
Well, thank you, Julie, for inviting me.
You've written a book, we see it on your table there, Iran's Great Awakening. Why did you write this book?
Well, it's a lifetime story. I came to Christ. I was a Muslim as a student at the University of Southern California. I came to Christ. My life was changed, and I started sharing the gospel with other Muslims. Hundreds came to Christ, planted churches in California, then used satellite television to get into Iran, and I saw a revival. Thousands and thousands have come and are coming to Christ. And that's the story. The second part of the book is about the prophecies in Iran. Not many people know about it, that Iran is in the Bible and God has prophesied what will happen in Iran. So I do a detailed study of the prophecies. The recent events shows and confirms what I wrote in the book months ago is totally happening today.
And what would those events be?
Number of salvation has grown 10 times the last few months.
Wow.
But even more important, just last week, an independent research and survey came out, secular, from Europe. They studied the religious beliefs of Iranians. And can you believe it? That survey, which is very scientific, very solid, says less than 1/3 of Iranians believe in Shiite Islam. Wow. In the books, it's over 95%. But what I've been saying, and I say in the book, now it's proven by science. Less than 1/3 believe in Islam. Another 1/3 say religion has no part in my life or there is no God. You can call them secularism. And the last 1/3, people are all over the place. They're looking at Buddhism, Hinduism, everything except Islam. And when they see Christ, when they share Jesus Christ, they're so attracted. That's why Christianity is growing in Iran. And do you know, Iran has the fastest growing evangelical population in the world today.
Do you see, for instance, the COVID crisis or even this recent signing of an agreement between Israel and the UAE? Ostensibly, that had something to do with it, was that they were both allied against Iran. Do you think these kind of things figure into people's thinking, your everyday average Iranian, that they're thinking about these things and watching these things?
Yes, all these factors are working together to increase the rate of Iranians coming to Christ. Mm-hmm. The Iranian government killed young people on the streets the last 8-9 months, and the COVID and the lies it has been giving to the people. The Iranian government has been so discredited. Whatever they say, people of Iran don't believe. So when they do these rallies, they say, with their own people, the rally says, death to America, death to Israel. You know what people say? Oh, they must be good people if our government is against it. So even among Muslims, there is a movement today that they say, why should we hate the Jews? What have they done to us? We should love them. You are our enemies, not America, not Israel. You are our enemies. You have hurt us more than any of these countries have done. When you look at the Bible, you see the past of Iran and Israel is tied together. So much in the Old Testament. Cyrus set the captives free. When you look in the future in the Bible, Iran and Israel are tied together. Their future is tied together because the Bible says, I will set my throne in Jerusalem, and also says, I will set my throne in Elam, which is today land of Iran. Iranians are saying, we are not enemies of any country. The government is, but not the people. So this is a trend going really fast towards the fulfillment of the prophecy.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hormoz Shariat, for joining us today. And your book really looks fascinating. Thank you so much. Still ahead, a visit to Israel's 9/11 Living Memorial for the 19th anniversary of the deadly terror attack on the United States. "19 years ago, terrorists hijacked 4 planes and rammed 2 of them into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. Another one into the Pentagon, and a 4th crashed in a field when the crew and passengers on board fought the attackers." We visited Israel's 9/11 Living Memorial in Jerusalem. Hi, I'm Julie Stahl for CBN News, and we're here today at the 9/11 Memorial in Jerusalem called the Living Memorial. Special place on a special day. We're marking the 19th anniversary of 9/11. First part of it is shaped like a flag. You can see it's quite tall. It's kind of crumpled at the bottom to symbolize the towers, the Twin Towers falling. Now it also has very special, a piece of the actual World Trade Twin Towers that was shipped here by New York as a symbol of the close connection between New York and Jerusalem. Another thing that makes this site very unique is that it's probably one of the only, or if not the only, memorial outside the United States where the name of every single victim is written. And among those victims are people that were in New York, but their countries don't have relations with Israel or diplomatic relations with Israel, and Israel still honored them as victims of this terror attack in this memorial. We want to pray for comfort for anyone who was wounded in the attack, who lost relatives and friends in the attack, and other attacks along the way. And we just ask for comfort from the God of all comfort. A lot has happened in 19 years. That's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time.